Hi, friends. Recently, I put a post out on social media asking you podcast listeners if you would please send me in what you're struggling with, what you're dealing with, what you're experiencing. And I got great responses. And so I want to start out by thanking you because I know that these are personal, private, vulnerable subjects, and it might feel a little bit weird hearing someone else try to explain it, especially the topic today. I don't have personal experience in, but someone that I care deeply about does. And so I kind of just dove in and did some research and just looked up the what, the why, and then the how of this topic. And so today we're going to be talking about scapegoats. And I feel like it's a really painful form of abuse. And so I definitely want to just start by saying that I am not a mental health professional. I am not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I am just a person who cares. I am here to help. And I did do a live on Instagram, and that is on my page. If you check out Good Words with Brandy Kelly, you can see that there. So each week before the podcast episode comes out, there is a live conversation happening, and it is interactive. You're welcome to hop on there and share your experience, ask questions, offer, other topics that you would like to discuss. And I just want to open up conversations about these things that we keep in the dark, because when we bring things that are in the dark out into the light, they lose their power over us. So acknowledging them, I feel like, is the first step to recovering from them. So what is a scapegoat? Oxford says a scapegoat is a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others, especially for reasons of expediency. So I had to look up expediency. And that is the quality of being convenient and practical despite possibly being improper or immoral. So it's expediency just means convenience. So it's shifting blame onto other people because it's convenient. Merriam-Webster says one that bears the blame for others, one that is the object of irrational hostility. Now, I often talk about not being the victim and not living in our victimhood, but there is real abuse happening. And so this is one of those instances where there is real abuse happening, and it's not your fault and it's not your responsibility, and you're not in charge of the actions, choices, emotions, words of your family member or your partner or your boss or your coworker or whoever is throwing all this at you. In this instance, this is where you absolutely know that you had nothing to do with something that happened, and yet you're repeatedly told over and over, sometimes over your lifetime, that everything's your fault, that the things that are happening, usually undesirable or unfavorable things, are because of you. It's not your fault. And you know that, but your conditioning and your programming that these people repeatedly shoving this onto you may be telling you, it may be telling you something else, and it could be wired into you. And if that's the case, I'm sorry. So to begin unraveling this, I just want to talk a little bit about more about the what. like what it is. The root of the word is actually from a goat, where communities would place their sins onto a goat. Like they would place the blame for their sins onto a goat, and then they would send the goat out. And like another word for the scapegoat is the whipping boy or the fall guy, or, you know, the victim or the Aunt Sally. And, you know, it's the person that takes the blame, not the person who actually, you know, does the crime or, you know, messes the things up. It's the person that will absorb all of the negativity to preserve the abuser. Scapegoats usually don't fit in with the rest of their family. They're likely the black sheep, and they're cycle breakers, like a lot of the time, to where they're the person who just sees clearly that this is not right and isn't willing to just conform to the dysfunction, because it's easier to just go with the flow. It's easier to just step back and just let the dysfunction happen. Than to be the person who puts your foot down and says, actually, no, this isn't the case. And that only gets you more backlash. Like no one goes, oh, you know what? She's right. Like it actually gets you more hate. And they can go, see what I mean? But they do it to protect the image of themselves, or the image of the family, or the people in the family who were favored. I read a little bit about this, to where it talks about having a scapegoat and a golden child in the family. And scapegoats are typically stronger than the golden child because they had to fend for themselves and they haven't been spoiled. They were forced to be more independent, think for themselves, and be stronger. Unfortunately, they also tend to undervalue themselves, and they experience shame, anger, sadness, and low self-esteem. Well, I wonder why. Now, Teal Swan, she may be questionable, but she said something that definitely made sense to me. The one that doesn't play into the dysfunction is targeted as the problem. That sounds like it hits the scapegoat nail on the head. So the abusers can call themselves the victim if they deflect the blame onto you, and then it frees them from taking accountability or responsibility for their actions. So they can put everything on you, and then they just look like the victim, and then this image that they want to portray is upheld. And it's a shame. It's a tragedy. If this is a parent, if this is someone that has been in your life forever, it's unfortunate. Now, once again, I haven't experienced this. So my take on how to recover from it, I have a really good example, because someone I love does an incredible job every single day. But I mean, I think it takes an incredible amount of just self-healing, on focusing on the self, on reparenting the self, on recognizing what you need in yourself, and then pouring that into yourself. And I feel like it, from the example that I have, is an incredibly long, enduring, and sometimes painful process. But I feel like it's necessary. The likelihood that those partners or family members are going to change is nearly zero. They're not going to wake up one day and go, you know what? I'm the asshole. They're going to go, oh yeah, sure, I'm the asshole. And, you know, you're going to be in the same song and dance. So part of that healing is really recognizing how much you're willing to expose yourself to, because on that journey of self-love and recognizing and knowing what you deserve and what you're willing to subject yourself to. Like, that's where your responsibility is, which I'm sure you know, because I'm sure in an attempt to not be like those people, you are one of the most accountable, responsible people, because you do not want to be like them. So having firm boundaries on what you're willing to accept, on what you're willing to subject yourself to. I mean, I feel like boundaries are one of the hardest things, but they're also one of the most important, to not continue participating, or not participating, but subjecting yourself, because you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Because if you do show up and just try to go with the flow, you're going to receive the abuse. And if you decide that you're not going to take any more of that and you don't want any part of that, well, then you're the bad guy once again. So once you recognize that they are who they are and they have continually showed you who they are, all you have control over is how you show up, and whether you show up and allow them to be in your life or not. And I feel like to completely remove yourself from a relationship, or from a job, or from, a family member, like, that's a really, really huge and painful decision. And I think it would come down to the pain of sticking around is greater than the pain of removing yourself. And that's a really personal decision, but is always an option. Um, I feel like our self-talk and our self-critic is so critical, regardless of our experiences. Like, those of us who are on a healing or recovering journey, whether it's from abuse, whether it's from, self-abuse and addiction, whether it's, just from life and lifing, our self-talk and how we treat ourselves are one of the first things that we need to change. So I will go back to an example that I've used just last week is, when you look at how you're talking to yourself, how would you talk to your best friend? How would you talk to your sister? How would you talk to your child? How would you talk to the person that you love? Would you want anyone to say to them the things that you're saying to yourself? Ask yourself that question when you're talking to yourself. Reparenting yourself, like, that is a whole rabbit hole that you can go down. And what a process of, like I said, really looking at what you need and you feel that you're lacking, and then opening yourself up and being willing to give yourself those things. If you're in a relationship where, your partner does things and then blames you for them, I mean, I don't want to say that that's not the relationship for you. Some of us are in marriages and we would like to stay that way, but just give yourself some compassion. Um, as far as the partner goes, I really am a big fan of finding the right therapist and actually addressing these things, not necessarily with the partner. I mean, that would be great, but just with ourselves, to where we can decide, like, how do I want to walk through this? Like, how do I want to show up in this? Because if you're constantly triggered, and especially if you come from a family background where you're the scapegoat, and now you're in a relationship where you're the scapegoat, which um, has a high likelihood, according to studies that I read on the internet. They say that if you experience that growing up, like, inadvertently you end up in relationships where you are experiencing that again. And so, I highly recommend therapy, because other people's actions and other people's thoughts and other people's behavior is absolutely not your fault. It is not your responsibility. And it's only your problem if you let it be. You were allowed to, require and demand, love and consistency and accountability and respect. You have every right to those things. And you get to choose who you surround yourself with. And if the people that are surrounding you and are in your life aren't treating you the way that you deserve to be treated, or that you would want your child or your best friend or your sister to be treated, then that's a something that you may need to reflect on and sift through. Like I said, I'm not a therapist. I can't explain why people abuse or whether they mean to. Psychological abuse is torture. It's torture. Especially when it's coming from someone that you love and that says they love you, because you start questioning whether you're the crazy one, like whether that is love, and like there's something wrong with you for wanting something different or better. It's like the truth, but then you just have to question because you just keep getting these examples of, something contrary. If you're experiencing this, once again, I'm sorry. And I love you. And I see you. And I am here if you want to vent, or you want to talk, or you want some support. And I put out new episodes every Wednesday. And we are currently on the path of listener topics. So these are things that you, the listeners, have reached out and asked me to speak on. And so today we talked about scapegoats, and next week we will be talking about how to love the life you have when it doesn't turn out like you expected. It doesn't look like the life that you planned for, hoped for. If you have a topic that you would like to hear discussed on the show, you can reach me on Facebook in the Good Words Podcast Facebook group, or Brandy Kelly on Facebook, on Instagram at Good Words with Brandy Kelly, and YouTube, same thing. And yeah, I will be live on Instagram on Monday at 2 p.m. Central, and I will put out a new episode next Wednesday. So I will talk to you then.